Hello and welcome back to my channel. So I thought I'd do a little video about some of my most treasured books, some of the books that are really prized possessions. And most of those books, conveniently enough, are all stored down here on my bottom shelf because they tend to be my heavier books. So to kind of weight the bookcase a bit better, I put my heavier books down here on this bottom bookcase. And this is where some of my absolute favourite books that I own, some of the ones that I look at most regularly, live down here. So I'm going to start off, and we're going to start off with some graphic novels. Some graphic novels that I own that are kind of prized possessions, usually because they're quite expensive, but also just because of the artwork, because of the stories they tell, and they're books that you know, in the worst case scenario, if you had to leave home really quickly, they'd be the books that you'd want to grab off the shelf and take with you. So we're going to start with this book, and I'm going to get the author's name completely wrong, so I apologise in advance. But the book is Munch, and the author is Steffen Kverneland. I think that's how you pronounce it, Steffen Kverneland. And this is a biography of the artist Edvard Munch in the form of a graphic novel. And it is absolutely extraordinary as both a concept and as a piece of art. This is absolutely extraordinary, and I'll try and flick through it a little bit, but there are some quite spicy images in this, and I'm not sure if I can actually flick through this. But what I'm probably going to do is, as I talk, I'll film some shots afterwards of me flicking through the books, so that you get a good idea of what they actually contain. But this one is quite spicy. It does have some adult content in it, but it's an absolutely extraordinary book. It's really imaginative, and one of the things I love about it is as it progresses, the art style changes through each era, not just to mirror the changes in Munch's style, but the changes in art through each era that Munch was active and working. So it's an extraordinary book, both in the sense of its story and just in a piece of art, as an art object. So it's one of my most treasured books. Next we have the Incal by Alejandro Jodorowsky and Moebius. I think it's pronounced Moebius and not Moebius. Moebius, the Incal. And Jodorowsky is quite a controversial figure. I've been aware of him for a long time because I like films, and Jodorowsky primarily became famous initially as a film director, directing sort of extreme cult films like El Topo, The Holy Mountain, and then later Santa Sangre. And I saw his films when I was a teenager, before I knew that there's some elements of his personal life which are quite controversial and continue to be quite controversial. And I'm not condoning any part of his personal life or any part of some of the kind of extreme onset behaviour that happened or is alleged to have happened during the making of his films. But how I got the Incal is a bit of a story in itself. So in the 1970s, after El Topo and after The Holy Mountain, Jodorowsky decided that he wanted to adapt Dune by Frank Herbert. He wanted to do an adaptation of Dune, and he'd never read Dune, but he felt that he had a concept of what Dune was about, and he envisioned this I think something like a 7-hour long extravaganza of a science fiction epic, and it was going to star people like Salvador Dali, and it was going to star Mick Jagger and the Beatles, and all of these, Orson Welles was going to be in it. All of these huge cultural icons were going to be in this film. It was going to cost millions and millions of dollars. It's going to be the most expensive film of all time. And Jodorowsky wanted every planet and every family and tribe within the film to be designed by a different artist and designed by a different designer. So he hired H.R. Giger and he hired Moebius. And a lot of Moebius's designs for ships and planets and costumes ended up being interwoven into the Incal. And there is a documentary about the sort of the making or non-making of Dune called Jodorowsky's Dune. And as a documentary, it doesn't paint Jodorowsky in a great light. But going through the archives for that film and looking at all of the artwork that they created, it's impossible not to be sort of enlivened and infused by the vision of the film and the imagery that would have been contained in the film. And so I had to get the Incal. I had to have a look at it. And again, this is just as a piece of art, as an art object, incredibly beautiful, incredibly vivid, and it's trippy and surreal and hallucinogenic, and just kind of bizarre in the best possible way, as well as being just a kind of, an action-packed space opera. So my second treasured book is the Incal. Next is a book that I got relatively recently, and it's Palestine by Joe Sacco. Now, Joe Sacco is a journalist, and he went to Palestine a number of times in the 1990s. So what this is essentially a piece of journalism. It's a journalistic text. It's a reportage. It's a document of Joe Sacco's visits to Palestine, which he's turned into a graphic novel. He's illustrated his dispatches. And with the situation currently in Gaza and the ongoing conflict between Israel and Hamas and the terror attack on October 7th, this has become a subject that people have a sort of renewed interest in. They want to know more about the history of the conflict, the history of Palestine, the history of what is happening in Gaza and the West Bank. And it's a topic that inspires a lot of passion on both sides, and discussion around this issue can be quite heated. Just mentioning it can be controversial. But I think going into this with an open mind, it is first and foremost an extraordinary piece of journalistic reportage. The illustrations are wonderful as well, and it really brings to life the atmosphere and the devastation and the suffering and the kind of lack of human dignity that results from ongoing human rights atrocity and ongoing suffering of people in times of conflict. And I thought this was remarkable. It was an eye-opening book, and I think, again, like the books mentioned previously, it is first and foremost a fantastic art object. But it has this impassioned story behind it. It has this sense of living history being recorded. It's a fantastic book. So next, on a lighter note, I can't even remember where I found this book. It's a reprint or a new edition of a book from the 1970s, and it is Suppose You Met a Witch by Ian Serraillier and illustrated by Ed Emberley. And it is absolutely remarkable. It is really just... I saw this and I immediately fell in love. And I saw it on a day when I didn't have a lot of money, and I'd already sort of bought a book. I'd already treated myself to a book, and I shouldn't have really bought another book. I'd spent my limit really, because I'm not a wealthy man. And I saw this and I couldn't not get it, and I flicked through it, and it is absolutely extraordinary. And again, it's just completely surreal. It's completely just sort of psychedelic and colourful and eye-popping in a way that children's books generally aren't. Children's books don't look like this anymore. And I think it's remarkable, because a lot of the times children's books from the 1960s and 1970s, they get reissued and they get re-released in new editions, and they get new artwork, and the artwork attempts to kind of mimic what's popular. It tries to capture trends that are ongoing in other popular children's fiction or other fiction in general. And I think it's fantastic that this maintains that 70s style, that kind of trippy, hallucinatory, psychedelic style, which is absolutely extraordinary. And it's a wonderful book. I really love this book. It might be one of my favorite books I own. It just, even out of this list of most treasured books, I think this is up there as one of the most treasured books. Next, another serious one, another book about atrocity and suffering, and that's Mouse by Art Spiegelman. And this is, most people probably know what Mouse is. It's Art Spiegelman telling the story of his family history, and in doing so telling the story of the Holocaust. But he's telling it through the lives of mice and rats, which sounds, if you're not familiar with the book and you told someone that, they might think it's such a kind of bizarre and potentially crass way of looking at the Holocaust. But it's absolutely extraordinary. It's an incredible piece of work, and it's an incredibly moving piece of work. And it's, again, like the book about Palestine, it's about just the worst of humanity, the worst suffering, the worst conditions, the worst exploitation of people, and the destruction of people. And this sort of came back into the discourse recently, because I think in America there were attempts to ban it. And I'm not sure what the context for that was, but I just remember seeing headlines and just seeing snippets of discussion and thinking, how can you ban Mouse? How could you ban Mouse? It's like banning the Diary of Anne Frank. It feels like such an essential story and such an essential lens through which Art Spiegelman tells this story of his family and tells this story of the Holocaust. And this again is even on a list of treasured books, I think this is a book that I recommend to a lot of people. And you always have to frame it just right, because I think there is that immediate knee-jerk response to saying, oh, but it's about mice and it's about rats. But it's about so much more than that, and it's such an interesting way of looking at history and getting people to engage in history in much the same way that you think of the projections that people put onto things like Watership Down, and projections that people put onto Wind in the Willows or Animal Farm. It's like it's that interesting way of looking at something through a different lens, that at once makes it easier to look at, but it doesn't rob it of of the pathos or the hurt and the anger that is inherent in the story and the way it's told. That's Mouse.